Dr. Jazz.
Yeah,
Dr.
Josh, I'll
Jazz.
just jump in. I mean, I have you on so many records, like from Ideal Bread on, like which is like
Oh,
quite a long time ago already,
oh,
and uh, and I saw
okay.
you. You know,
Thank
we,
you.
yeah, I love your playing and composing as well. But I want to start with your solo record, which just came out, right? The
Hmm.
Practitioners Volume #2. I mean, it's like your stuff and also Steve Lace's. And like, how come you decided to go the solo path, and how is it like for you to do that?
Um, well, there's a kind of aesthetic, philosophical part of it, which put briefly, I've been, for whatever reason, since I was, I don't know, 13, 15, obsessed with solo performer shows,
Okay.
both as both musician and actor. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was a very popular format for one people to come and do one person plays. People like Eric Bogosian
Mm.
and Danny Koch and Spalding Gray and Anna Devere Smith, who's still working. Um, so, there was that along with like the long tradition of it in classical music.
Mm.
But I just, for whatever reason, I was really lucky. Um, my dad had a very large record collection, and in it I had found both the Coleman Hawkins song Picasso, and then also the Sonny Rollins solo version of Body and Soul. And they just seemed like I was just instantly like a, moth to the flame, so to speak. Then there's a practical reason too, which is uh, I can get myself, I mean, these days now I've started practicing a lot after taking some time off, off, like really away from it, and then like just being a little bit more sparing about it.
Yeah.
So then I play all the time now. It's easy for me, in a sense, to work on things. It's a lot harder for me to get people together.
Mm.
Um, Partly it's a financial thing. Mainly it's that it's kind of a combination of things that where I live, if you need like the right kind of mix of circumstances where you have enough money, enough gigs, enough shows, and um, the people that you're looking to work with are actually free during that window. um, then yeah, then it makes sense because I um, records are. I didn't grow up with live music, so records are really, really important to me. Like the
Yeah.
experience of listening to a record is utterly distinct from going to a concert, and I love both of them. But having grown up with records and there was no live music where I grew up with. It was really pretty awful. Um, I didn't get to experience live music regularly until I went to college
Oh wow.
and
Okay.
moved to Chicago. Um, so, but I listen to a lot of records all the time, and so the sound and playing and not just like on a technical level, but there's a certain thing that I'm looking for on a record that I found can only be achieved through enough preparation and work together. Not even it's often musicians are a little, particularly jazz trained musicians, are a little too impatient. I find in this regard, where they feel like once they've kind of achieved the notes that are on the page and the ink, then they're done and it's all good to go. And I'm much more interested in the sound of a group.
Mm-hmm.
So a group of people who've spent time working together and creating a group sound. Um, you know, so pardon me. Um, and that's only the I only know the only way I've heard that achieved, that I've achieved that myself, is spending time together playing.
Yeah.
So um, it was so, yeah, I mean, put really simply, like, it was more or less impossible for me to achieve, like, get the people I wanted, have, and really get enough gigs for it to happen. I kind of write a certain way now, and I'm pretty comfortable, and I'm pretty clear on what I want to hear. Not necessarily on the surface, but I'm I know what I want, and I've realized through trial and error, it just takes. I write maybe not the hardest music, but idiosyncratic, and if people don't spend the time with it, it just doesn't. It sounds wrong. And so yeah, partly because like I'm really committed to the format of solo playing. This is my fourth solo record. Yeah, it's my fourth solo record. And partly because of the practicalities of it.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what's going on with it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, obviously Steve Lacy has done a lot of solo work, right? And what's your connection with Steve? I mean, it's a stupid question. Why Steve? In a way, I mean,
it's not a stupid question because as time goes on, he becomes more obscure, which is the
yeah.
natural
I mean, he's one of the
progression of most things.
underrated greats for me. I mean, he's still in the music
And
community known, but
it might come back around. The one thing humans, I find, I used to think it was just Americans, but I think humans in general can't really come to grips with the reality that tomorrow won't be today. So, which is to say that maybe 100 years from now, there'll be like a renaissance of interest in Steve Lacy's music. Of course, chances are that it won't happen, but it's happened to other equally obscure people. Emily Dickinson in her lifetime, totally
yeah,
obscure poet. Um, J.S. Bach was not popular as concertizing material until the 20th century. So he went through a good like 200 years. Beethoven's late music, like there's all sorts of examples. John Coltrane's late music, Miles Davis's late music. It just can take a while sometimes. Anyway, Lacy, it's a very personal thing. Is that I did graduate studies. Like it was really my only stint in a conservatory, a music conservatory at the New England Conservatory, 20 years ago now, which I'm still not comfortable saying because it doesn't seem that long ago. And I was really, really lucky in that the very end of my time there coincided with the very brief time that Steve Lacy was a teacher there.
Oh man, okay.
Steve moved from Paris in 2002. And accepted an invitation that Alan Chase had offered him to the New England Conservatory to become faculty there. Joined in the fall of 2002. Very sadly for everyone, he was diagnosed with cancer the following year, and he was gone by the year after that. So, yeah, I got to spend time with him, and I did private lessons with him. I also did ensemble with him. And for whatever reason, the two of us really clicked. I knew a little tiny bit of his music, and I knew enough about him to know that he had made a lot more music than I had heard up to that point.
Yeah.
It was really the record Evidence and the work, particularly on the track, which is one of those things with Gil Evans plus 10. But I'd heard in passing, his work from the 1980s and 1990s with his sextet and things like that. But I didn't own any of it, didn't know any of it well at all. So I was looking forward to meeting him. But it just turned out to be a much deeper, more powerful connection for me personally. And I found when we worked on music, in his lessons, you could play 3 different genres, 3 different musics with him. You could play songs by Thelonious Monk, you could play songs by Duke Ellington, or you could play his music that he wrote. And he wrote hundreds of compositions, like well over 300, of like fully thought out, completed stuff for different ensemble sizes ranging from solo up to like orchestral. he often would bring around tunes of his for the ensemble and also say in the lessons. And I sounded like crap on them. I was really bad at them. To be fair to me, I I can't really think of too many people at that time, other students who like played the songs in a compelling way. It wasn't fair because like, you know, you'd hear Steve playing it and it just sounded true
Yeah.
and clear and complete. In the same way that, you know, you hear Lee Konitz play, like when you'd hear him of All the Things You Are,
Yeah.
like it just, right, like that's this thing. It's a very complete work of art. And I was really fascinated by what Steve was able to achieve playing that material. And on the page, his material is, as far as like notes and rhythms, is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of trickiness to it, but it's much easier to read, certainly than a lot of like more recent compositions of the past 20 years for jazz trained people. And even if, you know, a lot of his stuff, not all of it, but, you know, can be is easier to play and read than some Thelonious Monk compositions. But that led to the pitfall of like, okay, I played what's on the page and I sound like a wanker. This is ridiculous. And so I was just really interested by that challenge. I'm like, okay, he sounds so correct and true. And yet when I play this and I can feel it, like I'm just like, the clothing doesn't fit right. It's not even that it was too tight or too loose. It just all the angles on it were wrong. And I didn't know how to like move around inside of it. So I had learned from being around him that he was a very literal person. He chose his words very carefully. He was very cagey, savvy and canny as well, but very, you know, was very diplomatic about the words he used, and he meant them in a very strict sense. He was outside of just a few people, like humans, period, that I met, one of the most well-read people I've ever met.
Well,
He was an inveterate book collector. I found out later from Han Benink that he had been on a tour with him and had brought his saxophone in one suitcase. And helping him with his stuff, Han like pulled out his suitcase and almost yanked off his arm. And he's like, "Steve, what the hell do you have in here?" And he's like, "Oh, it's just some stuff, man." And later he saw in a room when he walked in, he had it open and there was like, it was books. That's all was
really?
in the suitcase.
Oh, wow,
Books.
man. I
You
didn't
know,
know
I
that.
found out recently from the Sonny Rollins biography that apparently he would tour with like dumbbells, you know, and because he was very committed to physical health and maintenance. Steve was really, really committed to erudition, and
Mm,
he read widely in all sorts of fields. And he read um, his he had a wonky accent, but he was fluent in French, so read in French as well. Um, anyway, uh, he was, as he called it, a materialist, and he was very interested in working the material that he had before him in music.
mm,
And so I realized, like, okay, and watching him, it was actually a very simple matter of like, okay, you have this musical material, you work it. If it's of interest to you, or as he would call it, alive, you keep working with it. And you just keep working at it and working at it and working at it and working at it. And you don't stop to verbalize necessarily. So it's not about not thinking. It's just about keeping your musical intelligence, your, you know, thinking via music,
mm.
keeping that process moving, and using this material, which is perfect for me because I'm a workhorse. I like to practice and just put the horn in my mouth and play. And so I realized that at least the route, as I understood it, that he took with his music and to kind of get on board with it, is he just played it again and again and again and again, and you stay aware and keep listening to yourself while you're playing it, and you work it like that.
Yeah.
And so pretty much all my work for the first, I would say 15 years. So that would take me to about like the end of the teens, until about 17 or 2017 or 18. That's basically what I was doing. I was just playing the material again and again and again till I found like, oh, like it started to make, I started to feel true and right and started to feel like myself with that material.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
so he passed in 2004. He never asked me to do, he did want his music to become standards, jazz standards, and he was very honest about that. He wasn't joking. Um, and, you know, it may or may not, who knows. So he did encourage me, but he encouraged everyone to play his music all the
Yeah.
time and to just
Yeah.
kick it around and figure out what was going on with it and for themselves. Because watching him rehearse the ensemble was very interesting. He never told anyone how to improvise or solo, ever. The only corrections he offered is when you got the ink wrong. One of the first songs we played in the ensemble was Well, You Needn't.
Mm-hmm.
And like too many people, I learned it and memorized it from the real book, which is the Miles Davis version of it. The first two notes of which are not the first two notes that Thelonious Monk wrote into his composition. We played that, and some of the ensemble played the actual Monk version, and I started playing my version. He was a very sedate man. He was pissed.
Oh shit.
Really, really angry. He's like, you do not, no, no, man, no, 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 no. What are you doing? That was the one time you correct people. If you got the ink wrong, if you didn't phrase it right, and if you didn't get the notes and rhythms correct, that would bother him. Everything else, he just kind of let people do what they're going to do,
Mm.
which was really helpful to me to kind of see that he was, you know, not just, I mean, you can call it generous, but I think it's just smart.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be patient. People take up so much time working with them. It takes up a lot of time. And if you just let people be themselves for a while and just, at least in the arts, do a thing for a while and just hands off, stay away from it, unless it's like, say, really, you know, very clearly, like more meticulously structured material like ink or something like that, certain kinds of improvisation. Just let them do what they're going to do. They'll find a way, or
Mm-hmm.
they won't. And you'll realize that they're the wrong person for it, you
Yeah.
know. So, yeah, but I found otherwise with his material, if I just kept going at it and pushing at it and like, you know, doing it, walking away from it, coming back to it, it started to work for me.
Mm.
And
Interesting.
you know, the current recording of it, that was actually, I mean, I would say over really since 2016, 17, I've not really interacted with his music very much. So for about 7, 8 years, I've just kind of like, I've been working. A couple other artists whose musics I've been like spending a lot of time with, like Ornette Coleman or this
Mm.
songwriter who wrote a lot of famous soul tunes of the 60s, Dan Penn, Spooner Oldham. Like that's material I've been checking out a bunch.
Interesting.
I went through a Bob Dylan phase, but also just writing myself. Like just, I've been, especially recently, doing a lot more of my own original writing. Um, I didn't mean to make a recording of the second volume of Saxophone Etudes, but I just started using it as warm-up material and kind of kicking it around, and I found myself kind of falling into it and finding a certain relationship that, you know, I was willing to document.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
most of the stuff I produce on paper and sound-wise ends up in here in America. They used to call it the circular file, which is the euphemism for the trash can. It's the circular file. So most of my stuff goes there, just because it's fine, but it's like in the, you know, there is so much stuff available for people to experience that
Mm.
I'm just not what other musicians are different. I I hold myself to a pretty high standard. I have real serious problems with everything I've made, and that's fine. I'm okay with
Very
that.
interesting.
But it does mean that there's a lot of material that I make that I'm like, okay, I enjoyed my time. I did not waste my time. I have zero interest in asking people to give their time to this. If they want to, great. but I mean, I kind of make that editorial choice. Anyway, so in this case, I just felt like, okay, this makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, you know, beautiful recorded and
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, that's this guy Ryan Streber at Octaven Studio.
yeah.
He's very, very good. He's hard to get time with now. He's become pretty popular amongst New York City musicians.
Mm. Mm. No, but I also like this continued the lineage, you know, from Steve going solo to you, and it's I don't know, it kind of makes sense. It's when I listen to it, it's like really
Oh, good. Yeah, I don't
you
know if you
seem
knew
to
this.
get it. Yeah.
Steve actually never thought playing solo was a viable option until in the late 60s he went to an Anthony Braxton concert.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Wow. Wow.
Braxton was living in Paris at the time. Some of the first wave of ACM people had moved to Paris.
Yeah.
So Braxton was there with Leroy Jenkins and Steve McCall and Wadada, Leo Smith. The
Yeah.
art ensemble was also there. Some other people. It must have been such an amazing time to be there. Oliver
Yeah.
Lake had moved there. Some members of the BAG collective from St. Louis. Anyway, Steve just felt like, yeah, solo, man, it just doesn't work. Not on saxophone. And he went to an Anthony Braxton concert and he was pretty skeptical and he walked away from it and he was like, I guess this is a real thing. And he always took those things as personal challenges that he was like, okay, well, if that can be done and you can do a good concert playing solo, I should set myself to that task. And that's when he did. And I think his earliest recorded solo concert is live in Avignon and that's from 1971.
Yeah,
So
it's the
there
early
might be some
70s. Yeah.
earlier
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
So there's probably earlier ones because that's a pretty he sounds comfortable at that point. And it's a long concert. It's a serious show of stamina. But
Yeah.
it was he in a way kind of carried it from Braxton.
Yeah. Braxton did like what was that? 67, right? 68, the solo record. 68.
Yeah, for alto. But then there's
Yeah.
also a couple, and they've only was re-released. It's probably again now 20 years ago now. He made some solo records, really fantastic ones in Paris.
Mm.
They're released on these. There's a whole series of records by various people. It was, I want to say BYG, but they've got these very colorful abstract paintings
Okay, I'll
on the
try to search for it. Okay, I know for alto, obviously I have it, but okay, I'll try to find them.
Yeah, there's this later one. It's in a double CD, and I actually like it more than four alto.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think four alto is an amazing record. On this record, I wish I could remember. I think he has a particularly stunning version of his composition 26F on there. But yeah, and that's from the early 70s, something like that. So yeah, and I don't remember where. I think for Braxton, it was just this kind of omnivorous musical appetite to display, to work, I believe as he would call it, to work towards mastery in every possible configuration in him that he could, and to show his respect for not just jazz musicians, but all musicians that really touch him, which for him can mean like from Stockhausen to Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
They're all like really meaningful, touchstones for him.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But yeah, I think every older saxophonist I've talked to who does solo concerts, they're all like, yeah, Braxton was the first.
Yeah.
To kind of really point the way and therefore like point to where these floodgates were that everyone else could start prying open. So now there are hundreds and hundreds.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all underground. No one knows about them, but hundreds and hundreds of solo saxophone records. It's like, yeah, I was, not for nothing, but I waited until, I can't remember what year the solo saxophone record B came out, but that was my first like all solo saxophone record. And if I wasn't 50, I was like my late 40s. I mean, I could have made one earlier, but like, and actually I did. I made some passes at recordings, and I was just like, not ready. No, 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 not
That's
yet.
a heavy one, yeah. Solo saxophone.
Yeah.
That's
What, what? Like, I mean, again, everyone. Like, I even have like a Warren Marsh solo record.
mm,
He made a solo saxophone record. Um, there's almost every major saxophonist.
yeah.
John Coltrane just didn't live long enough to make one. I'm sure I,
You would have, yeah.
I think I could safely say that Eric Dolphy would have made one too.
Oh man, that would have been amazing. The dog.
Right,
Oh,
right. Yeah, all of
just
them. It would just
yeah.
be really, really intense and incredible things. But it seems to be this. Some people I think do it for competitive reasons. Other people I think do it because at best, I think in the best examples, they feel that it's the right format, the right container for what they're going to do. And then other people, I think, sadly do it just because they think like, well, this is the thing that you do as a saxophonist, which I'm like, I
Yeah, that's not a
guess.
good reason, yeah. But yeah,
I mean, I guess it's like,
yeah.
I'm not going to tell people they can't or shouldn't make it, but I don't know. It doesn't strike me. It's a lot of work to make one. It really, really is. It takes a lot of preparation.
Yeah.
Um, Anyone who says otherwise, I I would love to sit down with them because I would love to hear their version of okay, I didn't have to work very hard or prepare very hard because then I would want them to walk me through
Yeah.
what did happen. It just take and so to do all that simply because like, well, yeah, this is like I need to like, this is a thing that you do as a saxophonist. I'm like, why? No,
Yeah.
I
No, it's
don't know.
also scary, it took me like 20 years to do a solo guitar record, and I have, as a guitarist, I have harmony and intervals, and
You can
you
hit
know, I
multiple
I,
places.
I can do, and it's even that it's scary in a way, I did like during COVID, all compositions by Eric Dolphy for solo acoustic guitar, and
Yep.
I try to approach it like not like Joe Pass Tradition or Ben Monder or these cats, just
Right.
like
Right.
because that scares me. Those guys are monsters, right? So I just
Yeah.
went my own way, playing lines and maybe
Right.
counterpoints, but solo
Right.
saxophone, that's even scarier. It's just it's
You
one
have the
line.
line.
Yeah, it's
You have the monophonic line no matter
yeah,
because multiphonics are not chords. They're
no,
a different thing.
yeah,
They're explained on paper as chords, which, is points the way towards what they are, but that's not really what they are.
yeah, it
So
doesn't
yeah,
function.
you have the line and that's all you have.
That's
So it's
scary.
much
That's yeah,
more distilled. Yeah, I mean, a guitarist I think of who like wrestled with that really beautifully was Derek Bailey. I mean,
yeah,
he would do
yeah,
some chordy stuff as
yeah.
well, but and he's actually someone I listened to a whole bunch. There's a recording, Drop Me Off at 95th Street, Drop Me Off at 96th Street. It's on Bandcamp now. It's
Mm,
one of the most stunning solo things I've heard from anyone. It's amazing. It's like to me an untouchable record.
mm.
Like, and most of it he's playing single line.
Yeah, yeah. That's
With
how I approached it, because it's just
yeah,
like you can do a single line and it's valid if you really do it strong enough. It's
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah, amazing. But Josh, I wanted to ask you, like you said, now when you're composing, you kind of have a
Hmm.
more clearer idea what you want, and I wanted to ask you about your Four Freedoms record, which I love, by the way. It's
Thank you,
such a
thank you,
strong record, and
thank you.
uh, how did you write for that one? And are you still planning to work with that group, or how did that group come together? And
Um, yes, I'm planning on working for that group. I've been writing the next record
fantastic.
for a little over a year now. I mean, again, like I need to find a way to get enough gigs, enough shows for us to kind of bring the material together, which requires different factors.
Those guys are
But
busy.
yes,
Yeah,
I am working on that. That band started as just a trio, and it might become a trio again, like we did an earlier record, and with Chris Hoffman on cello and Tom Rainey on drums. Um, and that just occurred to me as a really good casting of characters. I'd met both of them at different times here in New York. Chris and I both moved here. He moved here before me, but we arrived around the same time on the scene, so to speak. I just liked him as a guy. I really enjoyed his playing from the moment I heard it. Um, like probably too many saxophonists, I've been really obsessed with the relationship between my saxophone and the cello, which I still argue is like the actual. If you write down the ranges of the instruments on a piece of paper, the baritone is the cello of the saxophone family. I understand arguments against that. Just, can't argue with physics. And so I really wanted to put my sound next to a cellist. Chris seemed perfect. And I've been working out a different approach to the saxophone so that the sound would make sense. Tom I had been hearing him for years and was lucky enough to meet him. And he had actually, in a joking way, I had once said to him when a bunch of musicians were hanging out, I said, yeah, and then I should probably do some group with you, Tom. And he looked at me and said, that's a very good idea. I'm like, okay, okay. And so it started out as the three of us, and then I've known Jonathan Finlayson for a while, and we had reconnected actually on a concert of Braxton's music, and there were just some really great resonant moments in that concert. He and I stayed in touch a little bit after that, and I just decided to try it out to see what it would. I just could hear in my head that there would be a really wonderful contrast. I am much. I like bands where you can get a little bit of everything. So I contrast and variety is much more important to me than similarity and sameness. There's been and it's still pretty present now, but very much a preference in the New York City creative music scene for almost like a sound of a super tenor, like two tenor saxophones playing the same lines at the same time. I just never liked it. I mean, I didn't hate it. It's just a color of choice. I don't like string orchestras. I like symphony orchestras. Don't like string orchestras. Same thing. So anyway, I started. I had that idea for the four of us. 2020 arrived. Everyone had to go indoors. I was already stuck indoors, so to speak. So that part of my life didn't change. But then a short-lived organization called, I don't think they're around anymore, called the Jazz Coalition or something. They started giving out small grants to different jazz musicians across the U.S. Saying, this was in the fall of 2020. The summer, American historical consciousness cracked open just a little bit due to the tragedies in Ferguson, Missouri. And so they sent out this organization selected me out of the blue and offered me this commission to make a piece of work, as they said, about the times that we were living in. And so I started thinking a lot about it, and that's when I kind of got to work on the record. I think I first became real aware of just how in love with African American culture I was at a pretty young age. It was about 14 or 15, and I read a lot of books, and I read most of the books in my family's home library outside of the purely academic ones. And so my mom would get frustrated and would make trips to the library and just bring back some books for me to read. And one of them was this really amazing novel, classic American novel called Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. It's told from the point of view of an African American, and it's
incredible,
touchstone piece of art for me. I've read it multiple times. It's an extraordinary novel, and I realized around the time I'm like, well, okay, I love this novel, and I find myself listening. This would have been 1986, 87. I'm listening to Stevie Wonder all the time. My parents had Talking Book and Songs in the Key of Life. So this is a little bit before he really kind of surged again in a way, listening to a lot of these records in my dad's jazz collection. So like Charlie Parker and Mingus and Miles Davis, Sonny Rollins, Coltrane, um, people like that. And I was just like, and hip hop was, that was the beginning of the just before what's called the native tribes, native tongues
Yeah.
started happening. But I kind of hooked into hip hop really early as just something I love to listen to. It kind of occurred to me, I was like, my life would be emptier and so very different without this music made by a community I do not live among. And yet something about their experience and the way they articulate it in art in general really makes sense to me. Anyway, so that thought was kind of occurring in my head fall of 2020, and I was trying to think about like, well, how do I pay respect to the music that's meant so much to me that's specifically come from African American musicians. I mean, there's European and white American musicians and Asian musicians, really probably more from like Japan, um, and a little bit from like Bali or something that I've like meant a lot to me. Um, but I started thinking about certain musicians who I really cared about, and I realized African American musicians, and the African American musicians that I started occurring to me, I realized that one of the things I really loved was their unique sense of counterpoint. And
Hmm.
that started coming down to a very specific body of musicians. So Julius Hemphill, Henry Threadgill,
Yeah.
Duke Ellington, James Brown, and Anthony Braxton. Um, and these were guys who developed a really unique sense of counterpoint of how people can play their own unique line, their own distinct line, but then exist in a kind of harmony, so to speak, with each other. Um, and it was much more uh, self-created in the same tradition that like Ives or Whitman or
Hmm.
Dickinson created
Yep.
their own art worlds. And there was a certain approach that each of these artists had developed around this notion of counterpoint, that I really loved the sound of it. And thinking about it more, I realized that there's a certain, to me, it represented a certain kind of political model that I also subscribe to, which is this a kind of compassionate anarchy where people can live their own lives as they see fit, but they are always striving at least to exhibit compassion and empathy for one
Yep.
another. So it's not this definition of anarchy of every person for themselves, screw all of you, I'm going to do what's good for me. No, we're all in this together. It's in my best interest to help you and know what your needs are. And I need to balance what is right for me with what's right for you. Um, so I kind of felt like that the examples of counterpoint from some of these artists like exhibited that same thing, where, whether it's like a certain kind of fascinating lockstep counterpoint and like James Brown between the guitar,
Hmm.
the bass, the drums, and the saxophone, and then Brown himself getting to be the real free agent in the whole thing, or like Henry Threadgill's compositions,
Yeah.
especially over the past 25 years
That's
with
incredible. Yeah.
Zooid and groups like that. But even going back for that, like Where's Your Cup and Making a Move and the
Yeah.
Sextet, Anthony Braxton, take your pick. It's like
Yeah.
it's all counting.
Yeah.
Julius Hemphill, same thing. Like certainly is writing for World Saxophone Quartet. But then there's trios and duos that he's written, the sextet, saxophone sextet work. And Ellington probably like one of the lived inside of that, how to balance all these utterly different, like that he could have Tricky Sam Nanton and Lawrence Brown in the same section and they didn't kill each other and they let each other and he let both of them shine in their own utterly unique ways. And from what I've read, Lawrence Brown was not a fan of Tricky Sam's playing at all. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Like, and that could happen. That he could keep Ben Webster in the band as long as he did that, and have these like really utterly unique sound personalities, and that, and then even various pieces he wrote, like Translucency is one where it's like this wonderful 3-part harmony, and counterpoint going on. And so I wanted to write something like that. And so it's probably the first time I've often written things in a little bit of a rush and minimized the amount of time I spent on the editing. And I've come up with some things I'm still okay with. I don't regret anything I've released, but this is the first time that I really took care with the editing. And I found I had just sitting around, I don't know why I got it, was the silliest idea, but I had gotten a book of staff paper for orchestral writing. So it's these very large pieces of paper. I'm like, got this sitting around. I hate wasting things. I want to have the inner voice of like, I can't believe like you just wasted that money. So I put it up on the piano on the keyboard, and I'm a terrible keyboard player. And I started just developing lines and then slowly trying to peck them out against one another, just listening to what I was making and listening for, it was my own version of a kind of serialized intervallic language, kind of like I would come up with an initial line and then I would examine it and examine the intervallic content of it. And then I would write comparable lines or contrasting lines based on their intervallic content, and then put them against each other and see if it worked. And it started working for me. I found like the pieces had a nice organic quality to them. I've really only written for like 2 voices, so it was a good stretch for me to like write for a full 3 voices in this. And it was the longest sustained writing on a single thing I've done. It was like about almost a year and a half of writing, of original material. Beating the Teens, that was like a year and a half of, a little over a year and a half of transcribing and arranging. So my own original arranging ideas, but this was the first time from ground up, and most of it, like I filled probably, I don't know, 10 pages, 12 pages of this orchestral paper, and only if you charted it out how much I used, it takes up 1.5 or 2 of those pages. So it's just kind of a distillation of all that material. So I was really, and went through some substantial rewrites. We did a couple of like video only, like live streamed concerts, and I would listen to them. And after the first concert we did, I think I threw out 3/4 of what I did.
Oh, wow.
Only one piece survived that call. One piece stayed constant and was like, okay, this piece is fine. And then it stayed all the way through to the end. Everything else got either kind of torn down to its original components and rebuilt, or just tossed out entirely and reconceptualized. And so it was the first time I did that as well, that I was just like, I just kept asking myself, is this what I want to hear? Is this something I feel like listening to? And if it wasn't something I felt like listening to, and which didn't mean it was bad, it's just a repeatability factor. Like, do I want to hear this thing again? Which is kind of a simple question, and I'm good at making artistic decisions. And I, when I went, no, not really. And I'm like, okay, it goes. Just back to work. Make it better this time. And I was pretty reassured in this, that like, I read a story once about Charles Ives, where it was late in his life, so he was essentially an invalid. I don't think I've ever read a clear account of where they can figure out exactly medically what happened with him. But essentially for the last 20 years of his life, he was bedridden. He could no longer work. He had a very successful career as a life insurance salesman. And it just sounded like he just so severely burned himself out, he couldn't do anything. Like, he did life insurance work nonstop during the week and composed all weekend, wasn't sleeping at all for probably about 15 years, 20 years straight. And then the other 20 years, he couldn't really function. Anyway, that point, people were becoming interested in his music. Someone was working on his infamous second piano sonata, and which is an unplayable piece. There's technical passages where the pianist has to make a decision of what they're not going to play. There's certain
Yep.
things just like, okay, you can't do this with two hands. And this is, so I think it was like two people went to visit him, had brought the score and said, and he was in bed and they said, what's going on with this thing here? Like, we don't quite understand this passage. Is this what you meant? And he said, okay, let me take a look at that. And he just started like rewriting parts of it right there into something totally different. There wasn't that. And they were just horrified. They were like, oh, God, now I have to learn something. Wait, what? And I knew a playwright, Habib Tanvir from India, who did the same thing. He would write an original play, and each night he would gather the actors around and he would rewrite chunks of it. Some actors, American actors I watched with it, hated it. I just watched them like, yeah, it makes sense. It's his.
It's like poetry writing, yeah. Some poets rewrite constantly.
Yeah, if it's not working,
yeah,
fix it.
Yeah.
So I was just like, yeah, there's certainly like not only precedent for it, but like some favorite artists of mine, they do this all the time.
Yeah.
Shakespeare's plays are made up of multiple editions. There is no authoritative Hamlet, authoritative King Lear, or any of that stuff, because there were different versions performed during his lifetime. So yeah, I went through a lot of rewriting until it kind of was like, okay, I think it's basically complete. So I think it's probably my most well thought out record of original composition that I've yet done. And I think, the secret, well, not the secret. All I did this time is I took a lot more time and was much more patient with it and much more unsparing in my criticism of it. I was much more willing to just throw stuff away, and I spent more time editing it and reshaping every little detail of it that I could think of, that I could hear, that was important to me. Thank God for music notation software, because I would just play it with the crap MIDI sound, and I would just find like I would be able to hear like, okay, that one chord right there is just not right. I know harmony, and it wasn't I didn't care about the functionality. It just wasn't the right sound, and I would just kind of move one individual voice and be like, so to that kind of level of detail, and I think that really, yeah, it made it, like I said, certainly the most organic kind of like start to finish, like, because everything grows out of a series of 4 different rows, like a certain kind of Americanized serialism where it's all 11 pitch rows, and I don't treat them as pitch classes. I'm not interested in the concept of pitch class. I'm much more interested in the relationship. So each one generates their own family of intervals. And so the 4 rows that I came up with they all are missing the note F, which is the first and last note of the entire record. And that's delivered in their original rows. I mean, the compositions obviously contain a lot of the note F. And when I came up with the other 3 rows, I basically like looked at what do I already have, what intervals have I not used, what intervallic combinations. So some of them, like one of them is it's basically built off of tritones and half steps, which is a pretty, gives a, pretty predictable sound, and affect of like angularity and, a certain kind of like weird sound, standard weird sound. But that one came about because like, okay, I have these, actually, I think, I have these other 2 rows, and I haven't used those. And so I would just kind of like construct the lines that way. But yeah, I mean, so it was a lot of very detailed, like just kind of like looking at the paper and making the little points.
Yeah. And Tom had like a carte blanche, right? Or did you write out stuff for him as well? Or
did carte blanche, or did I write what?
In a sense, like, I mean, Tom, you didn't write anything for Tom, right? Or
no.
No, right? Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, I've written drum parts before.
Mm.
Um, Tom doesn't. Tom reads. He reads amazingly well,
Yeah,
but he
yeah. I mean,
reads the
yeah,
chart, whatever else
yeah.
is doing. Um, he and he doesn't need to
No, I
read. I
know.
mean,
He's
giving
a
him.
monster. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Well, yeah, and it's only he's been like playing drums professionally since literally he was a teenager, since he was a
yeah,
kid. So anything you want, you just ask him.
yeah,
It's just much easier to do it that way rather than writing out the drum part.
yeah.
He would ask me what I was looking for and would ask me detailed questions, so I still had to be very clear in my
Oh,
head
really?
about
Okay. Interesting.
function of the drums. And if I wanted him simply to orchestrate, I'd be like, just orchestrate. You know, yeah, I mean, if anything, working with New York musicians, the funny thing is I often had to tell them, don't worry about keeping a super strict, steady pulse in certain pieces. Some other pieces, sure, do that. But that's very much a New York way of like, okay, like that. There's nothing wrong with that. I often create music that's contrast or contradicts what I'm hearing around me. And I just like something that's a little more loose and open,
Mm.
still together with a nice momentum to it, but a kind of approach to rhythmic articulation that I picked up from living in Chicago for 10 years and just from what I've absorbed
Mm.
from
Yeah,
music in general, and certainly from African American music, is a certain kind of flexibility in the space between pulses,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
which more and more music I hear out of the New York creative music scene is not in vogue. I'm not
yeah.
saying people can't do it. It's just
It's
not the
different.
thing.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah, they want
Yeah,
that kind of a thing.
yeah,
I mean, added to that, I'm not the world's greatest interpreter in that kind of rhythmic approach. Like, it's not as a terribly, um, it's not my strong suit. I can do it within an extent, but so yeah, I often had to, and or I'd write something out with a slightly, I would just the the melody, the written part would. I I did this thing that Thread Gill would talk about in his master classes, which I'd write out the piece first and then I'd put in the bar lines.
yeah, yeah,
So I'd have these forms sometimes that are a little weird. And they'd ask me like, okay, so we improvise over the form, and I'd be like, if you want,
yeah,
it's totally a valid choice. Like Steve Lacy, like, that's what you want to do. Okay. I'm not gonna stop you. Um,
yeah. Exactly.
you know, so yeah, that was something that it was just funny that having to tell people that they could soften up and loosen up with it, which also meant that they could make that I needed them to make very clear choices for themselves, that I was demanding of them their agency, which
Yeah,
I used to think I'm giving you this opportunity. I realized like no, some people don't want that agency. Some people just want to be told exactly what to hand over. That's fine. I usually don't hire those people, not because they're bad, but I want people like I give you this thing, make it yours.
yeah,
Zappa would say, put a mustache on it.
yeah,
Figure out like how it's going to be your thing. So then sometimes it's almost like the equivalent of like they're looking at me inside of like while they're playing, like, is this what you wanted? Something like this. I'm like, it's not my call. It's not my call. It's your material. I watched Anthony Braxton do this with his musicians over and over and over again. Um, and it's a tough responsibility, but
yeah,
man, it's produces my favorite art, and again, kind of going back to this idea of counterpoint of like, you are responsible yourself for yourself, but you're responsible also to make sure that we can maintain ourselves as well.
hmm,
I don't think I was entirely successful on personally in like really giving the music enough or really a clear enough aspect in that way. It's okay. I'll work for it on the next record, or it'll come back. I'll have an opportunity to try again. You
hmm.
know.
No, this one
But
is strong. For freedoms is so strong, man. Really, it's I don't
yeah,
know.
the next
Just
record will probably
yeah,
be not as programmatic in the sense of like, okay, this is like one piece that just kind of like it's entirely like from the jump, like the material that's going to be that's you hear, that generates the entire piece. The next one will just be probably just a series of compositions
Hmm.
of mine, because that's what I've been working on. Just kind of, I seem to have struck a nice little seam of metal, like materials that interest me with Four Freedoms, and I'm so using techniques that I learned from writing for that I'm just applying to other, more material that I'm coming up with. But yeah, I mean, it'll be,
Beautiful.
I think I know it will be it'll make sense coming from the Four Freedoms record. Hopefully I can make the record end of this year, next year. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely.
See.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. What's otherwise? I mean, you mentioned working on this record, writing the music, but what will you still be involved in this year? I mean, do you have any plans coming to Europe as well, or touring wise,
I
schedule
I
wise?
I do, and actually I need to get back on that. I'm going to be in Europe in July. Right now it looks like I'm going to be in Berlin
Mm.
and Belgium around Ghent, and then in the UK.
Your project,
The
or
United Kingdom. Hmm?
with your project, or
No, it'll be
okay,
me on my own. I can't afford to bring anyone. I mean, my project in the sense is in the sense of there's there's at least one thing if I can carry it off in Berlin that like a specific group that I need to sit down and flesh out the compositions, but there's a specific group of musicians who live around there that I want to get them together and play some music of mine. But otherwise, I'm just showing up and playing whatever solo concerts, free form concerts with other people. I'll bring my music. I'll probably I can with today's technology I can like easily print up like Steve Lacy charts, or
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean I have charts of other stuff of Hempel and like Ornette Coleman stuff. So it's more in that line. I yeah I mean I don't I kind of look at like hiring musicians as a little bit like you want to, when people go and get a plumber or a contractor to build out your house, how good do you want the workmanship to be? We all know with that, if you run like plumbing that's definitely not going to leak and it's going to like do exactly what you want and last a long time, you're going to spend more money. You know,
yeah.
if you want it just to be done, so you have a functional like toilet or whatever, and you're not worried about next year, you go cheaper on it. And it's the same thing with like for my artistic projects. If I want it done well with the right kind of spirit and artistry, not necessarily technique, although my compositions require that too, a certain types of technique. Um, then yeah, the people I want to work with, it's as I've gotten older, it's gotten smaller, and they have they charge appropriately for their skills. They're very skilled people. Um, so I used to get upset about that because they don't really care how I pay for it. In other words, if I'm going into debt, that's not their
That's the
responsibility.
band leader thing. Yeah, sure.
It's not their
Yeah,
responsibility.
sure.
I worked once briefly for someone who complained endlessly about how much he was paying us, and I was just like, look, I what
Yeah,
kind of you got to quit it. So no, I can't bring over a project. Maybe someday I could bring over something again, but it's like it's really the primary thing is the money thing. I'm pretty good at hustling up gigs. Um, I haven't led. I've only done led one tour in Europe, and I haven't gotten to play there nearly as much as I'd like to. Hopefully, I can start coming over more often. But yeah, that'll be coming later this summer in July. I will be in France, but that'll be right around the time of the Olympics, so
okay.
it'll be that'll be insane. So I'm working on that. I have the material for Predicate has been taking up a bunch of time, and then I have another group in my mind. Well, I have more than that. I have one, two, three other groups that I'm writing for, and I get superstitious that I'm not going to actually follow through on my projects, so I usually don't give too many details about it
Sure.
because I've had a bad habit in the past of saying like this is going to be blah, 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 and it's usually a good idea.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I know
people,
what you mean. Yeah,
even if it's not, they're like want to be polite. They're like, yeah, you should do that, and then it never goes anywhere. Nothing happens.
yeah.
So I have about three other things. Hopefully, at least two of them will launch this year.
Fantastic.
You know, I'm basically trying to make the best of. I'm stuck at home a lot, like all the time now, and I'm trying not to be an asshole about it. And I'm trying to, um, yeah, just kind of take advantage of the time as best I can to keep a positive, not positive attitude. I hate that phrase. I'm trying to stay constructive. Um,
Mhm.
my job in this lifetime is to make stuff. So I'm just trying to sit down every day and make sure I make some stuff. So we'll see. Uh, so hopefully I'll follow through on more of that stuff. I mean, again, stuff happens. I have complete control over what I put out because absolutely no label is interested in me. I'm not. I know that sounds like a complaint, but they're really not, and that's okay. They have so many people coming at them. I've sent stuff off to like pretty much every label you can think of, like from, more well-known established labels to like, okay, this is literally a musician who lives in my same neighborhood. And I think only really, well, three labels, but really like as far as like kind of more than one release, only two labels have ever said yes to me.
Mm.
It does mean though that I'm constrained financially. I have to pay for everything.
Yeah,
So I have to
yeah, yeah.
pay the musicians, the studio time, the mixing, the mastering. I don't stint on that stuff. The production, physical production. If I have publicity for it, then I pay for that publicity. And I have to work with my family, figure out how to finance that. So it does puts like a pretty strict cap
Yeah,
on what I
yeah, yeah.
can put out,
Sure.
how often I can produce stuff. I think that was the other, now I think of it, the other reason I did a solo record last year. I try and do a record a year, and given time constraints and financial constraints, I was like, well, if I want to get a record out, like basically more or less within 2023, even though it came out officially in January, the solo is the best thing to
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I'd say that lately it's been, particularly since the solo record, I've just been really focusing a lot more on the saxophone, on the baritone saxophone, much more than bass clarinet or flute.
mm,
Which I love those instruments, but that's not like
sure.
kind of the other half of my heart, so to speak.
Yeah, beautiful, man.